Shop Superstart Premium, Extreme, or Platinum batteries at O'Reilly Auto Parts and get up to a $15 gift card after rebate. O-Reward members can also get a $5 reward with their battery purchase. For power, performance, and reliability, choose Superstart. Only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
I want to listen to Project 2025. I converted it to an audiobook. Let's listen through. This is section 1. If you didn't see the other parts, don't sweat it. This stands independently of the rest.
American dominance of the global energy market would be a good thing for the world, and more importantly, for we the people. It's not just about jobs, even though unleashing domestic energy production would create millions of them. It's not just about higher wages for workers who didn't go to college, though they would receive the raises they have missed out on for 2 generations. It would build powerful alliances with fast-growing nations in Africa and provide us the leverage to counter Chinese ambitions in South America and the Pacific. Locally, it would drive billions of dollars of private investment to the communities that have been hammered by globalization since the 1990s.
That have been hammered by globalization. Anytime you hear them talk about globalization, quote unquote, it's them being nationalistic. There's a difference between nationalism. Holy Christ, dude, what is happening outside? That is insane. There's a difference between nationalism and patriotism. Nationalism is the belief that your group has the sole right to rule, and that the other groups need to either be removed, deported from the country, removed from power in one way or another. White nationalists, for example, believe that only white people belong in power in the country, and some of them believe that only white people belong in the country. Christian nationalists believe only Christians should be in power in the United States. There are a billion different forms of nationalists. It's usually paired with another word. There are black nationalists even that want to create an independent country for black people where white people are not allowed. It should be clear how that's different from patriotism, right? Now, nationalism without a qualifier, without like an additional adjective, just plain nationalism, usually applies to like U.S. nationalism, just like your belief that the United States is exceptional and deserves to rule everything. Wow, I don't know what is going on outside, but it is insane. I'm not going to miss this. This happens more often than you'd think, and I ignore it usually. Anyway, like the United States deserves to control China and Russia and everywhere else, and should take over as much as humanly possible. Try to take everything. That's what nationalism is. So anyway, when they talk about globalism or globalization or whatever, it's in contrast to nationalism, which is what they are. A lot of times people don't want to speak positively about nationalism because that's what Hitler was. He was a nationalist. The National Socialists, also called the Socialist Nationalists, another word for it. And the Christian denomination, the basically Nazified Christianity, wanted to call themselves the Christian Nationalists. It's a little more complicated than that, actually. They wanted to call themselves Christian nationalists, basically evangelische Nationalismus. But they ended up calling themselves German Christians because Hitler personally vetoed the name Christian nationalist. Anyway, that should give a little context. Let's keep listening here.
And it would clarify our intentions to Beijing that the next president can ensure that a large part of America's reindustrialization is in the production of the equipment we will need to dissuade future foreign meddling with U.S. vital interests. Promise number 4, secure our God-given individual right to enjoy the blessings of liberty. The Declaration of Independence famously asserted the belief of America's founders that all men are created equal and endowed with God-given rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's the pursuit of happiness, that is central to America's heroic experiment in self-government.
When they say pursuit of happiness, the founding fathers had something very specific in mind. Like and by the way, that's in the Declaration of Independence, not the Constitution, I believe. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit of happiness means, you can't be jailed for absolutely no reason. But these people interpret it completely differently. These people interpret it to mean like your right to, let's just listen and let them explain it.
When the founders spoke of pursuit of happiness, what they meant might be understood today as, in essence, pursuit of blessedness. That is, an individual must be free to live as his creator ordained.
I don't have any clue what that means or what the hell they are talking about. That is nonsense. You think the founding fathers, the founders of secularism on a national level, wanted people to pursue blessedness? That's what they put in there? What are you talking about, bro?
To flourish. Our Constitution grants each of us the liberty to do not what we want, but what we ought. This pursuit of the good life is found primarily in family, marriage, children, Thanksgiving dinners, and the like.
Oh my God, dude. Are you hearing this? They're saying that our rights are not, all right, us having the right to do things isn't, we don't have the right to do whatever we want. They're saying we have the right to do whatever we should, i.e., we want to marry a guy if we're a guy. Like, we want to be able to get gay married. That's not a right because you shouldn't do that. You only have a right to do what you should do, which is get married to a woman. What a whacked out, ass backward interpretation. That is wild. I just finished writing a book titled Was Hitler an Atheist? It talks about religions during the Third Reich and how they worked together. Catholics, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Protestants. And I even address the lies told by the evangelical world about Bonhoeffer. It's on Audible and Amazon. Okay, let's continue.
Many find happiness through their work. Think of dedicated teachers or healthcare professionals, entrepreneurs or plumbers throwing themselves into their businesses. Anyone who sees a job well done as a personal reward. Religious devotion and spirituality are the greatest sources of happiness around the world. Still others find themselves happiest in their local voluntary communities of friends, their neighbors, their civic or charitable work.
So they're saying your right to pursue happiness, we're going to tell you what that's going to be. And we've determined that church makes people happy. So you have a right to go to church. Otherwise, the right to happiness doesn't apply in any way. That is wild.
The American Republic was founded on principles prioritizing and maximizing individuals' rights to live their best life or to enjoy what the framers called the blessings of liberty. It's this radical equality.
Okay, I've never heard the term blessings of liberty, but I guess maybe. No, it was all built on the right to do whatever we want as long as we don't interfere with other people's rights.
Liberty for all, not just of rights but of authority, that the rich and powerful have hated about democracy in America since 1776.
They're trying to pretend to be like, they're right-wing populists right now. They're trying to pretend to be anti-rich person. Do you know how filthy rich the people are that wrote this?
They resent Americans' audacity in insisting that we don't need them to tell us how to live. It's this inalienable right of self-direction, of each person's opportunity to direct himself or herself and his or her community to the good, that the ruling class disdains. With the Declaration and Constitution, our nation's founders handed to us the means with which to preserve this right. Abraham Lincoln wrote of the Declaration as an apple of gold in a silver frame, the Constitution. So must the next conservative president look to these documents when the elites mount their next assault on liberty. Left to our own devices, the American people rejected European monarchy and colonialism, just as we rejected slavery, second-class citizenship for women, mercantilism, socialism, Wilsonian globalism, fascism, communism, and today, wokeism. To the left, these
Oh my God. I love how they categorize quote-unquote wokeism in the same group as fascism and communism.
assertions of patriotic self-assurance are just so many signs of our moral depravity and intellectual inferiority. Proof that, in fact, we need a ruling elite making decisions for us. But the next conservative...
Holy shit, dude. Are you hearing this? One more time. I just want to understand what they're saying here.
assurance are just so many signs of our moral depravity and intellectual inferiority. Proof that, in fact, we need a ruling elite making decisions for us.
We need a ruling elite making decisions for us, they said. Oh my God.
But the next conservative president should be proud, not ashamed of Americans' unique culture of social equality and ordered liberty. After all, the countries where Marxist elites have won political and economic power are all weaker, poorer, and less free for it. The United States remains the most innovative and upwardly mobile society in the world. Government should stop trying to substitute its own preferences for those of the people. And the next conservative president should champion the dynamic genius of free enterprise against the grim miseries of elite-directed socialism.
Free enterprise is bright and good and happy, I guess. And socialism is bad and evil and wrong. Do you know what socialism is, actually? I found this out recently. Socialism is simply, all right, nonprofit organizations like 501c3 nonprofits, they have a board of directors, and that board of directors is voted in, and they make decisions for the organization. Everybody along the line is voted in. Like, bosses vote for bosses who then vote for other bosses. Everybody's pay is voted upon. Like, my wife works for American Atheists now. The board has to vote on hiring her, on how much money she makes, and things like that. That's socialism. That is what socialism is. That's how it works. It's called a democratized workplace, where everybody all along the line like votes on things. That isn't like a bad thing. I don't understand why anybody would say that that's a bad thing. Like, what? Additionally, free market, whatever, is objectively worse than that, in my opinion. But okay, whatever. Also, one more thing. Socialism had a different meaning in Germany, like the National Socialists, the nationalist socialists. What it meant at that time was in favor of social programs, like welfare programs, pensions, military funding, Social Security, universal health care, things like that. Anyway, that's what that was. But, these people that we're listening to are going to lie about it and twist it around and turn it into something it's not, as usual.
The promise of socialism, communism, Marxism, progressivism, fascism, whatever name it chooses, is simple. Government control of the economy.
Fascism, progressivism, wokeism, and fascism are all the same thing, you see. Okay.
Can ensure equal outcomes for all people. The problem is that it has never done so. There is no such thing as the government. There are just people who work for the government and wield its power, and who at almost every opportunity wield it to serve themselves first and everyone else a distant second. This is not a failing of one nation or socialist party, but inherent in human nature. Nighttime satellite images of the Korean peninsula famously show the free market South lit up, with homes, businesses, and cities electrify from coast to coast. By contrast, communist North Korea is almost completely dark.
Well, actually, North Korea is a democratic people's republic. To correct you on that. Now, in all seriousness, North Korea is a nightmare. It's a hellscape. It's terrible. And it does have, fewer lights. You can very clearly see, less lighting at night from space. That's true. But you know what caused that? It wasn't communism. It was authoritarianism. It was dictatorship. That's what caused it, which is literally what this document, Project 2025, is trying to produce. It's trying to create they just said it should be in the hands of a ruling elite, right? This document is trying to rework the U.S. government to be something that can be controlled completely and totally by the president, and that's it. They are complaining about something and trying to create that thing. I mean, it does not get more disturbing than that.
Except for the small dot of the capital city, Pyongyang, where a psychotic dictator and his cronies live. The same phenomenon is on display in the infuriating fact that 4 of the 6 richest counties in the United States are suburbs of Washington, D.C., a city infamous for its lack of native productive industries. We see the same corruption.
What? I don't think I know what he means.
Expressed on an individual level whenever billionaire climate activists who want to outlaw carbon-fueled transportation fell to A-list conferences on their private jets.
I mean, that's a little hypocritical. That's true. But they are advocating for policies that would completely change the whole thing. And honestly, private jets, yeah, they are a problem, absolutely. But they're not the biggest problem. I'll tell you what would be fantastic is if we could change our entire electrical grid around to be renewable resources, like fully outfit our electrical grid with solar power, nuclear power, and wind. I'd be way happier with that. And if they need to take private jets to these conferences to plan how to make that happen, I'm okay with that. That's fine with me.
Or when COVID-19 shut down politicians like former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and California Governor Gavin Newsom were caught at the hair salon or dining at fancy restaurants after moralizing about how everyone else must stay home and forgo such luxuries during the pandemic.
I mean, this is complicated, but there is no nuance in these people's minds, so I'm not going to bother.
For socialists, who are almost always well-to-do, socialism is not a means of equalizing outcomes, but a means of accumulating power.
No, it's not. It is literally not that. It is democratizing a workplace, as I just described. These people shamelessly lie. Like, you can't convince me that the lawyers that wrote this don't actually know what socialism is. You can't convince me of that.
They never get around to helping anyone else. The Soviet Empire was a social and economic failure.
The Soviet Empire was not a socialist organization or government or whatever. It was a communist government. They're different. You can't convince me the lawyers that wrote this don't know that socialism and communism are different. Do you think that they could define them for us? Both of those things? Socialism is effectively a democratized workplace where people vote on their bosses and they vote on their bosses and their pay and everything else. And communism is state-owned, or people-owned if you want to get technical or whatever. Everything is owned by the state. And that's fantastic in theory, but in practice, corruption slips into every system, and you need to have a balance against corruption.
North Korea, despite the opulence of its tyrants, is one of the poorest nations in the world. Cuba is so corrupt that its people regularly risk their lives to escape to Florida on rafts. Venezuela was once the richest nation in South America. Today, a decade after a Marxist dictator, Sanders' home state of Vermont was forced to repeal the state's single-payer healthcare system just 3 years after creating it.
Okay, a lot of these cases had nothing to do with socialism or communism, and in fact, some of those aren't even socialist or communist. It was authoritarianism and corruption that eroded the system, which is exactly what this Project 2025 is trying to create. I can't believe they just sit here and say all of this shit with absolutely no shame. This just blows me away.
In every case, socialist elites promised that if only they could direct the economy, everything would be better. Very quickly, everything got worse. In socialist nation after socialist nation, the only way the government could keep its disgruntled people in line was to surveil and terrorize them. By contrast, in countries with a high degree of economic freedom, elites are not in charge because everyone is in charge. People work, build, invest, save, and create according to their own interests and in service to the common good of their fellow citizens. There's a reason why the private economy hews to the maxim.
They literally just described communism. They said, wait, let me step back one more time. I'm sorry.
Build, invest, save.
Wait.
Line was to surveil and terrorize them. By contrast, in countries with a high degree of economic freedom, elites are not in charge because everyone is in charge. People work, build, invest, save, and create according to their own interests and in service to the common good of their fellow citizens.
That is how communists define communism. It all has nuance, of course. Communism and capitalism aren't the same thing, and they don't operate that way. But wow, that is really funny that they described it that way. So stupid.
There's a reason why the private economy hews to the maxim, the customer is always right, while government bureaucracies are notoriously user-unfriendly.
They cut the last part of that. The customer is always right in taste is the rest of that term, I think. Meaning the customer dictates what kind of product the customer wants. You can't force a product on people. They're going to choose it.
Just as there's a reason why private charities are cheerful and government welfare systems are not. It's not because grocery store clerks and PTA moms are good and federal bureaucrats are bad. It's because private enterprises, for profit or non-profit, must cooperate to give to succeed. So as the American people take back their sovereignty, constitutional authority, respect for their families and communities, they should also take back their right to pursue the good life.
Yeah, but that's literally the exact opposite of what this document has been describing. This whole time, they said, we want to put power in the hands of an elite. That's what they said earlier. Am I wrong? Did I misunderstand? I heard them say that. They want to put it in the hands of an elite. That is the exact opposite of what they're advocating for now, suddenly. They're pretending that they don't want that or whatever. What is going on here?
The next president should promote pro-growth economic policies that spur new jobs and investment, higher wages, and productivity. Yes, that agenda should include overdue tax and regulatory reform, but it should go further and include antitrust enforcement against corporate monopolies. It should promote educational opportunities outside the woke-dominated system of public schools and universities, including trade schools, apprenticeship programs, and student loan alternatives that fund students' dreams instead of Marxist academics.
Yeah, that's one of the goals of Project 2025 is to reduce the number of people that go to college. And this exact thing happened in Germany also. The reason I bring up Germany is because I think that the people that wrote this read through some history books for tips, really. Authoritarian governments work similarly all over the world. It's not like they don't necessarily need to read old history books on World War II to whatever, but in this case, I believe that they are reading through for tips. It's too similar. It's too, let me say this. It's too similar for coincidence, in my opinion. It's like when Donald Trump quotes Hitler word for word, saying that people are cockroaches or that immigrants are poisoning the blood of the country. This is literally word for word what Hitler said. They believed Jews to be immigrants, even though they weren't. Word for word. I have trouble believing that it was just pure coincidence.
Just as important as expanding opportunities for workers and small businesses, the next president should crack down on the crony capitalist corruption that enables America's largest corporations to profit through political influence rather than competitive enterprise and customer satisfaction. Analogous pro-growth reforms for America's voluntary...
So what they just said is they're talking about crony capitalism, which pretty much everybody can agree is bad, right? People using their position to like benefit their own companies and things like that. That's bad. Except they're not trying to fix that. These people who wrote this are actively trying to make that worse. They're trying to take advantage of crony capitalism while pretending that they are not. It's shameless.
Civil society are also in order. America is not an economy, it is a country. Economic freedom is not the only important freedom. Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and the freedom to assemble also represent key components of the American promise. Today, in addition to the problem of big tech censorship, we see speakers at universities shouted down, parents investigated and arrested for attempting to speak at school board meetings, and donors to conservative causes harassed and intimidated.
I'm sorry, I cannot let that stand. No. People are not arrested for speaking at school board meetings. There was one woman that was arrested after going to a school board meeting who basically said she was going to come back with a gun next time. If they don't change this policy, she's going to come back with a gun. See, they'll change it then. That's terrorism. That is illegal. She deserved to be arrested for that one. Also, in addition to that, there was an organized group. There's an organized group of people that were moving through the country from school board meeting to school board meeting. They didn't even like have kids in that district. They didn't even live in that district or even that state. And they were going from place to place, speaking at these school boards, trying to force them to do things and threatening them, following the school board members home at night and, stalking them effectively, scaring the shit out of them until the Department of Justice wrote a memo on basically how they were going to arrest terrorists if they're terrorizing people to get them to change their political position based on that terror, which is exactly what terrorism is. If they were doing that, then they were going to be arrested. That's what was happening. That was the letter to from the DOJ. And that's what Project 2025 is talking about. They're trying to make it out as though the Department of Justice was just threatening to arrest random people who just cared about their children. It's nonsense. It's all nonsense. All the way down. I don't want them to get away with any of this BS.
The next conservative president must defend our First Amendment rights. Ultimately, the left does not believe that all men are created equal.
I certainly believe that. I don't know what you're talking about.
They think they are special. They certainly don't think all people have an unalienable right to pursue the good life.
Yes, I do.
They think only they themselves have such a right, along with a moral responsibility to make decisions for everyone else.
It's not a moral responsibility, but in some cases, we have an obligation to protect society from idiots for the good of everybody in society. For example, if somebody has polio, all right, let me frame it up in a way that like a conservative mind might be able to understand. If somebody has HIV because they've been sleeping around out of wedlock or whatever, I have a moral responsibility, I guess one could say, suppose, to protect society by making sure that they don't go around sleeping with other people without warning them. That's called, I think that's some form of murder, right? I'm not sure. If somebody has polio and they're going around spreading it to others, I have a moral obligation to protect society from those people spreading it to others intentionally or otherwise, even unintentionally. If I can stop 50,000 people from dying by getting them vaccinated, I have a moral obligation to make sure that as many people are vaccinated as possible. Now, I don't want to force vaccines on anybody. If you don't want to get vaccinated, you don't have to, but you can't participate in society in a normal way if you don't. Your kid cannot go to school with people that are vaccinated or some who couldn't be for one reason or another. You're going to have to homeschool them or send them to a private school in that case, for example. I need to protect society from some idiots. And in that way, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few in some cases. Guns, set the Constitution aside because the Constitution does not protect everybody's right to own a gun completely unregulated. Just ignore it for a moment. Guns being behind every blade of grass increases the likelihood that mass shooters are going to be able to get their hands on those guns and perpetrate it. However, if you regulate it well by having a licensure program, gun insurance, making sure everybody has a gun safe as a mandatory part of owning one or whatever, well regulated, I think the U.S. could decrease the number of deaths yearly by like an insane amount. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few in that case. You want a gun, you can have one, but you have to prove you know how to use it and keep it safe. You don't want a vaccine, you don't have to have a vaccine, but you can't transmit your illness to the rest of society or put the rest of society at risk. The Project 2025 people wanted to twist it around to be a situation in which they're being persecuted. They want the right to infect other people. They want the right to put school children in danger by passing out guns on the street practically. And you are violating their rights. Your rights end where my rights begin. I have a right to life. You don't have a right to put my life in danger by passing out guns on the street. Anyway, there's a balance there, and it's pretty clearly defined in the Constitution, the balance is. But conservative nutcases like Trumpists and Kevin Roberts, the writer of Project 2025, and others, have flipped that balance around to be something completely different.
I don't think any citizen, state, business, church, or charity should be allowed any freedom until they first bend the knee. This book,
No, I don't want anybody to bend any knee to anybody else. I just don't want you to be able to violate other people's rights in the process of exercising your own. That is exactly what, the government is there to do, is to protect me from that.
agenda, the entire Project 2025, is a plan to unite the conservative movement and the American people against elite rule and woke culture warriors.
Please.
Our movement has not been united in recent years, and our country has paid the price. In the past decade, though, the breakdown of the family, the rise of China, the Great Awakening, big tech's abuses.
The Great Awakening. God, that kills me. Seriously. What a stupid name.
And the erosion of constitutional accountability in Washington have rendered these divisions not just inconvenient, but politically suicidal. Every hour the left directs federal policy and elite institutions, our sovereignty, our constitution, our families, and our freedom are a step closer to disappearing. Conservatives have just 2 years and one shot to get this right. With enemies at home and abroad, there is no margin for error. Time is running short. If we fail, the fight for the very idea of America may be lost. But we should take this small window of opportunity we have left to act with courage and confidence, not despair. The last time our nation and movement were so near defeat, we rallied together behind a great leader and great ideas, transcended our difference, rescued our nation, and changed the world.
Unfortunately, Trump didn't win because these ideas of Project 2025 were popular. He won because Kamala Harris was very, very unpopular, or people just otherwise weren't motivated to vote Democrat. They weren't motivated to get out there and do it. Trump, honestly, isn't much more popular than he was last time around, which is to say he's not popular, like, at all. I don't think that the country is ready for a female president, unfortunately. I just think that's what it is.
It's time to do it again. Now as then, we know who we are fighting and what we are fighting for our republic, our freedom, and for each other. The next conservative president will enter office on January 20th, 2025, with a simple choice: greatness or failure. It will be a daunting test, but no more so than every generation of Americans has faced and passed. The conservative promise represents the best effort of the conservative movement in 2023, and the next conservative president's last opportunity to save our republic. Section 1. Taking the reins of government. Next presidency, America is now divided between two opposing forces: woke revolutionaries and those who believe in the ideals of the American Revolution. The former believe that America is, and always has been, systemically racist, and that it is not worth celebrating and must be fundamentally transformed, largely through a centralized administrative state.
I'm sorry, what? What is all that? Said that the left believes all that? No, the left does not believe any of that. They said, hey, let me just, one more time, just listen again.
Revolutionaries and those who believe in the ideals of the American Revolution. The former believe that America is, and always has been, systemically racist, and that it is not worth celebrating and must be fundamentally transformed, largely through a centralized administrative state.
No, that is the exact opposite. The left believes, of course, that America is built on like systemically racist qualities. That's just true. That's factual. That is the case. But I don't believe that it shouldn't be celebrated. Like, I'm patriotic. I love the country. Yeah, absolutely. And I also don't, my patriotism motivates me to fight against anybody that wants to centralize the government power in the hands of a few. That is what this document is. Describes how to centralize power in the hands of, like, the Republicans, of Donald Trump specifically. That is what this document is about. I have no idea, like, what they're even talking about. It's like they're demonizing something and then going on to describe how they intend to do that thing.
The latter believe in America's history and heroes, its principles and promise, and in everyday Americans and the American way of life.
Okay, that's what Republicans believe in? All right, go on.
They believe in the Constitution and Republican government. Conservatives, the Americanists in this battle, must fight for the soul of America, which is very much at stake.
The Americanists, i.e., I mean, should I take that to mean that, like, Republicans don't view the left as American? Am I reading this correctly?
Just 2 years after the death of the last surviving Constitutional Convention delegate, James Madison, Abraham Lincoln warned that the greatest threat to America would come not from without, but from within. This is evident today. Whether it be mask and vaccine mandates, school and business closures, effort to keep Americans from driving gas cars or using gas stoves, or effort to defund the police, indoctrinate school children, alter beloved books, abridge free speech, undermine the colorblind ideal, or deny the biological reality that there are only two sexes, the left's steady stream of insanity appears to be never-ending.
Like, this whole thing is delusion. None of this is true. The left is not trying to do any of this shit. It is pure, unadulterated delusion. One more time.
Or deny the biological reality that there are only two sexes. The left's steady stream of insanity appears to be never-ending.
Yeah, this is all just false.
The next administration must stand up for American ideals, American families, and American culture, all things in which, thankfully, most Americans still believe. Highlighting this need, former director of the Office of Management and Budget, Russ Vought, writes in Chapter 2, the modern conservative president's task is to limit, control, and direct the executive branch on behalf of the American people.
Right. The Office of Management and Budget, OMB, I believe. They're going to talk about that a lot in a little while. But I believe that it is basically like, I think it's like the HR department of the staffing at the White House or in political appointments, to my knowledge. So they're basically going to try to fire anybody. They're going to try to fire people for political beliefs. If you don't support Donald Trump specifically, if you didn't vote for Trump specifically, you might be facing a firing, basically.
At the core of this goal is the work of the White House and the central personnel agencies. Article 2 of the Constitution vests all federal executive power in a president, made accountable to the citizenry through regular elections. Our founders wrote, the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America. Accordingly, Vought writes, it is the president's agenda that should matter to the departments and agencies, not their own. Yet the federal bureaucracy has a mind of its own. Federal employees are often ideologically aligned, not with the majority of the American people, but with one another, posing a profound problem for Republican government, a government of, by, and for the people. As Donald Devine, Dennis Kirk, and Paul Dans write in Chapter 3, an autonomous bureaucracy has neither independent constitutional status nor separate moral legitimacy. Byzantine personnel rules provide the bureaucrats with their chief means of self-protection. What's more, knowledge of such rules is used to thwart the president's appointees and agenda. As Devine, Kirk, and Dans write, managing the immense bureaucracy of the federal government is impossible without an understanding of the key central personnel agencies and their governing laws and regulations. Many of these laws and regulations governing a largely underworked, overcompensated, and unaccountable federal civilian workforce.
Underworked and overcompensated workforce? Is that what they just said?
Many of these laws and regulations governing a largely underworked, overcompensated, and unaccountable federal civilian workforce are...
Yeah, that's what they said. Underworked and overcompensated workforce. So they're saying we want to pay people less and work them harder. I mean, they're working 40 hours a week. What do you mean underworked? You saying you want to increase the work week from like 5 days a week to 6? And federal employees are overpaid? I mean, that's one opinion. I think the rest of society is underpaid, but okay.
So irrational that they would be comical in a less important context. This is true whether it comes to evaluating employees' performance or hiring new employees. Only in the federal government could an applicant in the hiring process be sent to the front of the line because of a history of drug addiction or alcoholism or due to morbid obesity.
That doesn't happen. Applicants have never been sent to the front of the line because they're drug addicts. That has literally, to my knowledge, never happened in the history of ever. Drug addiction works against you when you're an applicant to anything at all. Trust me. Or obesity or whatever. These things work against you. They're like, how can they even say this? It just blows me away that they say this like without a hint of irony. Like even under affirmative action, which is now undone, like it doesn't exist anymore. Affirmative action doesn't, to my knowledge. Even under affirmative action, that's not how anything worked. People would be, companies would favor equalizing demographics. All other things being equal, they would try to make things fair. So if there are like, 30% black people in this town and you only hire 3% black people, they would try to even that out. by, all things being equal, hiring a black candidate until it's equalized again. If you have 35% black candidates and it's only 30% black, your town is, then they'll try to hire an additional white force or an additional Asian force or whatever. Like, it's trying to even out. I guess you couldn't have an explicit racial quota before affirmative action, but it doesn't matter because affirmative action is undone anyway. So what was, you couldn't have a racial quota, but what was affirmative action then if not trying to even things out more? Oh, okay. No, it's fine. No, that works. Yeah, so no racial quotas, but people pick the black applicants in the spirit of trying to make things more fair, basically. That's what it was. Like, it doesn't matter because it's been undone. It's no longer good law, to my understanding. So it's irrelevant now. But that's what these people are talking about. They're complaining about things being more fair. Seriously. They didn't want things to be more fair. What purpose could they possibly have? Like, what goal exists here? Why would anybody try to make things less fair like this? I can only think of one reason: to make it so that, like, black applicants have a harder time obtaining work in any industry. I can only think of one reason why anybody would try to do that. I mean, if you got another, tell me in the comments.
Irritable bowel syndrome, or a psychiatric disorder. The next administration should insist that the federal government's hiring, evaluation, retention, and compensation practices benefit taxpayers rather than benefiting the lowest rung of the federal workforce. In order to carry out...
Okay, I don't know what that means, but no, people should be paid a fair wage for the work that they put in. I don't care about any of that.
The president's desires, political appointees must be given the tools, knowledge, and support to overcome the federal government's obstructionist human resources departments. More fundamentally, the new administration must fill its ranks with political appointees. Devine, Kirk, and Dans observed that the Trump administration appointed fewer political appointees in its first few months in office than any other recent presidency.
Okay, this is what I'm talking about. When they were saying previously that North Korea is like a train wreck, it's really bad, and that, the free